Cool. It's working. Hello, hello. It's good to see everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in a second.
Welcome, everyone. As you're getting your audio set up, we're going to give you a couple minutes, 2 to 3 minutes at the beginning, just to reflect on this do now question. And once you're done with that, if you want to place your answer in the chat, that'd be great. Some great answers in the chat. Thanks for those of you who are putting your answers there for your peers. We're going to give folks another minute or two just to hop on and do the same. All right, take one more minute, and then we'll move on to the start of the presentation. All right, Elizabeth, if you want to move us to the title slide, that would be great. So welcome, everyone. It's great to see you again. Thank you for your great answers in the chat. See a lot related to scheduling, see some around staffing, pacing guides and instruction, a couple answers around MTSS, which is great. We are definitely helping some districts and schools think about MTSS and the opportunity to revamp that as you know, we come out of the pandemic. So some great answers there, and we're going to talk about all of that today in the presentation. If you'll go back one, Elizabeth. Great. So today we're going to talk about strong systems. Some of you have been with us for all of the previous 7 sessions. Some of you, this is maybe your first time attending one of these sessions. Welcome to all. We're going to try and frame up information from some of the previous sessions pretty quickly at the beginning, just to make sure we're all grounded. in learning acceleration and the Nebraska frameworks. And then we're going to talk about systems, the systems that allow us to accelerate learning in the classroom. And as you are thinking about school renewal moving into the fall, just everything that surrounds learning, but is necessary for learning to be accelerated. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We have up to 2 hours today. We're definitely going to give you all some work time. Today's session is based off of TNTP's experiences, as well as our work with CCSSO, the Council of Chief School Support Officers, and the CCSSO guide. And so we're going to provide you all with a framework for thinking about systems and change management as you head into the next school year. We're going to try and provide as much information as quickly as possible so that you have less time listening to us and more time to consider the resources and work as school teams throughout today. So Elizabeth, if you'll move on, and we'll introduce ourselves. For many of you who have attended sessions before, you're familiar with our team. My name is Chris Henderson. I am a partner with TNTP. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I've been working with the Nebraska Department of Education for the past year now. I've been working with districts and schools all over the country around learning acceleration, especially thinking about next school year and what is the work that has to happen this spring and this summer and over the next 2 years to make sure that we address unfinished learning and we can accelerate learning for students. Our fearless colleague, Caitlin, could not be with us today. She's traveling for work, but Elizabeth and Shireen are with us. And so Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you to just do a quick introduction for those of the audience that are new today.
Hi, Elizabeth Lamont Mitchell. I'm working with TNTP around this learning acceleration work and also implementing this work in schools in New Orleans. So been able to experience it firsthand and also collaborate with TNTP on the process.
Thanks. And Shireen, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name is Shireen Faruti, and I am with TNTP, also working on this acceleration work and about to kick off some similar work with one of your sort of neighboring states very shortly. So I'm excited, and thank you all for the friendly faces every session after session. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks. So just a reminder about our etiquette or netiquette for today's session. Please make sure that you do what you need to be engaged. We know that many of you are in school buildings, some of you are at home. All of you have multiple priorities and things hitting your inboxes and your priority list, even as you're attending the session. So we really appreciate that you're here, but definitely make sure that you're doing what you need to engage in a way that feels most comfortable. Please make sure that you take a moment and get yourself ready for this experience. There is not necessarily any pre-work, but we have some resources that Shireen is going to continue to put into the chat. And then as you can, please mute any background noise unless you're talking, and we encourage you to jump in and chat with us throughout the session. Right. So here's where we are on this slide. This is the culmination of 8 sessions that we've delivered over the last 3 to 4 weeks or so, all around this topic of school renewal and learning acceleration, understanding that there is currently likely unfinished learning for students, and that when students come back in the fall, that it is going to be important to make sure that they are doing grade level work, that we're providing them the supports that they need to access grade level work after the difficult past year. And all those sessions have been geared around that. Largely up until today, these sessions have been centered around academics, and specifically ELA and mathematics. Today, we're going to shift that a little bit, and we're going to talk about, as I mentioned at the beginning, some of the systems that surround all of these other pieces and allow learning acceleration to actually happen. Those of you who either missed previous sessions or this is your first session, all of the previous materials for each of these previous 7 sessions, including recordings of the sessions themselves, are available on the Launch Nebraska website. And so we can certainly make sure that you have access to all of those materials and resources if this is your first time, or you need to refer back to them as well. And thank Corey for dropping that into the chat. Elizabeth, next slide, please. Okay. At the end of today, hopefully you'll be able to answer, what resources your schools will need to be able to implement learning acceleration, as well as understand some of the resources that are available to you in your district to consider as you're planning. What are some of the key considerations? Scheduling, staffing, family engagement, technology that we think that you should be considering, and what are those important pieces within each of those buckets to consider. And then what tools teachers and leaders can use to monitor progress for learning acceleration. So that's what we hope to accomplish today. Before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to Shireen to do a high-level overview of where we've been to ground us before we go on to where we're going.
Thank you, Chris. So we have done a lot, and we have thrown a lot of resources and content and information your way. And so first, just thank you again for joining us as often as you have. And on the next slide, we're going to see a little bit about the next couple slides. We'll be talking a little bit about how Nebraska's framework dovetails and sort of connects very seamlessly with the work around acceleration. So if you go back one slide, Elizabeth, you'll see the language, and language we know is very important, and the intentionality around using phrases like unfinished teaching and learning instead of learning loss. Thinking of acceleration instead of remediation, and we'll go to that a little bit more in depth again in a moment, and then renewal instead of recovery. On the next slide, we will look at the different sort of bigger buckets, and we actually, these 6 focus areas have been sort of addressed in some way or another over the course of all of the sessions, and will be touched upon again today. Today, though, we're really going to speak to the systems considerations, and you guys named several of them that are front of mind for you in the chat earlier for the do now, and we're going to look at planning for acceleration and then reiterate the value of high quality instructional materials and content. Next, we are going to look the 4 core actions that are at the heart of the framework for school renewal and acceleration, have each been addressed or touched upon throughout our 8 sessions. But today is a little bit like, if any of you knit, it's a little bit like weaving in the ends after you finish knitting different colors of a scarf. And we need to be able to weave in the ends in order to actually do the work of acceleration. And we're all coming at it in different places and from different timelines. And so this will offer some more information on how you can do it a little bit more effectively. Next, we are going to just sort of, this slide speaks to what we spent good chunk of time talking about at the very beginning in our first session. Remediation is sort of the typical approach towards unfinished learning, whether it is a result of absences or whatever it may be. And remediation, as well-meaning as it may be in terms of meeting the students where they are, it does not offer them the opportunity to actually be at where they need to be, which is at the grade level content and being able to actually execute the work that's going to be expected of them. So accelerated learning is what we have been discussing, and it is the focus of just-in-time supports with access to and constant focus on current grade level content. And that focuses on the now, whereas remediation tries to focus on the past. So that's a good sort of framing to ground ourselves in. On the next slide, we'll look at the 4 different components that are the values that we sort of really emphasize in terms of these next steps. If you could take a moment, we'll take about 30 seconds, just read them and reflect in the chat on where your focus is now and going into 21-22 school year. I can't see the chat on my screen at this moment, so hopefully there are some good answers. Chris, do you see anything that
I do. Thanks, Christy. She mentioned address inequities. If others want to put where their focus area for your individual self, for your school, for your district, that'd be great. Thank you. Grade level content and inequities. Address inequities, grade level content.
Thank you so much. So on the next slide, we're going to see what we went over. And this is the plan. But we know that people are coming from different spaces in terms of actual geographic districts, campuses, from different lenses, whether it's at the ESU level or at the state level or at the campus level. And we know that you're at different stages of the acceleration process. So I'm going to set a minute on my timer and ask you to take a moment to just see where you think you and your team are on this path. You can share it in the chat if you want, but you don't have to. Okay. So as you're thinking about the work that we will do for the rest of this session, be thinking about where you are in these steps. And again, it's completely okay if you are at a very different place than someone else who might be in the group that you're working with this afternoon. So on the next slide, we're going to take a quick look back a little bit at what we did in terms of, and I saw this came up in the do now, is what it will mean to execute on accelerating student learning in the next 2 years. So focusing on that most essential skills information, I saw somebody mention that was front of mind for them. Planning the approach to diagnosing students' unfinished learning. If you missed it, we did a whole session on this where it was really focused on diagnosing versus assessing. The third is to adapt your scope and sequence and pacing guidance. I saw that, I think 2 different people named that as an area that they are focusing on right now with their acceleration planning teams. And then training your teachers and leaders. That was the session that we just wrapped up, where the teachers and leaders at the campus level are able to diagnose the unfinished learning and provide the acceleration support that students need. And finally, to monitor students' progress on grade appropriate assignments and to adjust those supports. So the emphasis there is the grade appropriate assignments and identifying what supports are working and what might need to be tweaked or revised. So with that, I pass it back over to Chris.
Great. Thanks, Shireen. And To hit on a couple slides back around planning your work, putting together your committee for learning acceleration. As Shireen mentioned, some of you are already doing the planning work. Some of you are just starting it. Some of you have large district teams as a planning committee. Others within your district or your school, maybe you're a planning committee of one, or maybe you're a teacher in a school and you're trying to bring information back to your school and your district. So we know you're all in different places, and I think many of you have been back in school for a little bit now, and you figured out the systems to the level of how do you ensure that students are safe and that they're healthy? How do you ensure that there's good technology connection to students who are back in school as well as students who are still virtual? But we also know that, as you're building on the fly, that those systems can be even stronger heading into next school year. And spring and summer, as I put in the chat, the perfect time to be thinking about this. And so no matter where you are, no matter where your school or district is, don't feel like you're behind. Making sure that, what we hit on the previous sessions, that you're taking one or two things to really prioritize and focus on the rest of this school year to make sure that as much unfinished learning is covered as possible, but really looking into next school year. Spring and summer is a perfect time to be planning. So this is great. On the last slide, Shireen, talked about the 5 different steps of learning acceleration of what TNTP recommends that you do to execute. All these steps or most of these steps are geared around learning and academics. And what we're going to talk about today is really, we know that this work doesn't happen in isolation. It's very, very important for many of you who are chief academic officers or teachers, that on a daily basis, this is the work that most directly touches students, but that without the other systems of the district all moving in one direction, it's impossible for this work to take place. And so what we're really going to talk about today are some of those non-learning, non-academic systems and pieces that we think you should be focused on. So Elizabeth, if you'll advance a couple slides, please. Thank you. So there's 7 guiding principles for how we would recommend that you think about systems and set them up for the school year. As we'll touch upon here in a couple of minutes, for every school and every district, there are going to be different systems that you prioritize. For some, it might be scheduling. For others, it might be, we heard at the beginning, others it might be MTSS, which certainly involves many different systems that interact with one another. These 7 guiding principles, we believe, if you hold true to them in your systems work, will lead to success and make sure that you can set up a successful change management process. So number 1, prioritize safety first. As I mentioned, we know that many of you are back in school and you have been back in school. Certainly, as you came back to school, you were thinking about student safety. We also know that, as we go into summer school and as we go into the fall, that, physical safety, emotional safety, and well-being of students, staff, support staff, and administrators can be really important. So first and foremost, prioritize safety first. Second is we saw a lot of comments around the core value of inequities and making sure that there's equitable opportunity for grade appropriate assignments for all students. And so ensuring that your learning acceleration plan addresses inequities head on, particularly for those students who are most marginalized. We've talked about the opportunity myth in previous sessions. In the opportunity myth, we found that access to grade appropriate rigorous instruction and high expectations were lower for students of color, students who are below grade level, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, students with learning disabilities, and ELL students. So ensuring that you are meeting the needs of not just some students or tier 1 students, but all student groups and all teacher groups is going to be really important as you think about your plans and your systems. Third, make sure students and families are partners in decision making. Many of you, have certainly understood this your entire career, and especially this past year, that there were many decisions to make. And each time a decision was made, particularly back when things were virtual or things are a hybrid model. That communication can be even more difficult, or it's not always intuitive to then go communicate around every decision to students and families all the time. And so making sure that you have an intentional plan to engage families and students. Engagement will actually be one of the systems that we'll talk about, but that is certainly very, very important. And that goes along with communicating to your stakeholders there down in the next row. Fifth, using resources strategically. Again, we'll from this past year was an exercise in how do you leverage your resources and how do you reallocate your resources to shift and meet the needs of students and families, whether it be having a focus on food and making sure that students and staff have access to food, or it's focused on safety, operations, and technology. Using resources strategically is really important. Supporting your school teams and your teachers and learning and adjusting quickly. So we'll hit on at the end of this session, as we have in previous sessions, if you are not setting goals or clear benchmarks, and if you are not tracking something, then it's as if it didn't happen. So making sure that you have clear systems to make sure that you can measure progress and shift as you go is going to be really important. And again, is going to be another one of these systems that we talk about. So Elizabeth, if you don't mind going to the next slide, we're going to walk through a high level example of how all of this plays out before we go in deep on some of our recommendations. So all of you who are in a school or district understand that there are many systems. We named some at the beginning. Here are just 5 systems out of many within any school or district. You have school management, you have teaching and learning, which we've spent the previous 7 sessions talking a lot about. You have human capital. So perhaps, this past year and moving into next year, some of you have had to hire additional resource staff, additional nurses, additional counselors, additional instructional assistants or paraprofessionals within your building. Maybe some of you, this past year has shifted the way that your ability to either retain teachers or recruit teachers different ways. Certainly operations, as you thought about if your school went virtual and then came back in person, operations is certainly a big system. And then finance is another one around the resource allocation. So I think, if you're in a district, and particularly a larger system, I love it, Stacy. We welcome all pets to these sessions, and so cats are very welcome. If you work in one of these areas, sometimes the work can feel siloed, and we do our work day to day. That we try and collaborate, we try and make sure that systems are connected, but sometimes the goals or the day-to-day things that we're driving toward can feel pretty siloed. It's going to be really important that all of these are interconnected as we move forward, because we're all operating toward one goal. So Elizabeth, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, we'll see where all these systems are working toward classroom instruction and student learning. Teaching and learning is certainly directly tied to what happens in the classroom, but without the enormous effort of all these other systems and all these other departments, that classroom instruction, is not going to be maximized. It's not going to be as effective and efficient as it needs to be. And we know that with the additional challenges of this past year, and as you look toward next year, it's the time to reimagine what has been happening in schools and districts. And it's also the time to reimagine how you can efficiently and effectively make sure all your systems are lined up toward classroom learning. This outlines how all these pieces are connected. It outlines what falls under each of these buckets. And, we would posit that each of these is vitally important, even if it's not always directly visible, to making sure that learning acceleration occurs. So we're going to pause here, give you at least a minute to digest this slide a little bit more. And when you've had a chance to take a look at this slide, just drop in the chat, what's resonating with you. What is this making you reflect on? Maybe there's one of these areas where you feel like your school or your district really needs to put more focus into, or it was a success story this past year. So we'll give you 1 minute, reflect on the slide, digest it, and then put, just a thought or reflection, whatever the slide is making you think, in the chat for us, please. Okay, seen some great answers in the chat. I get, one or two folks to come off mute and share a reflection with the group for us.
I will, Chris. This is Megan Harding. I put in the chat just that shift in our systems thinking from how reactive we've had to be all year to really thinking about how we can be proactive. I know in the pieces that I supported in hiring for our districts this year, we were able to wear a different lens than we normally would when we're looking at who we want to be in our classrooms, when we're looking at who we want to lead our buildings. And I just, as we've talked about all these things throughout these sessions, I just keep reflecting on that shift to being proactive. And I put in the chat, pandemic or not, I think that's going to be a major shift in how we make better changes to our systems in general and affects all Nebraska students. So I think that's just really powerful.
Yeah, thanks for that great reflection, Megan. And certainly, as I mentioned, spring and summer is a perfect time to be proactive as you can be, knowing that there's so many other priorities on all of your plates. But once you get to the fall, it's almost too late. So really excited to hear about that shift to proactiveness. We have time for one more share out if there's someone else who would like to comment.
This is Christy. I'm with Nebraska MTSS, and I'll just piggyback off Megan's comment, just in regard to the fact that it is all about that system build and that we just can't be piecemeal in our approach. So I like this graphic. It really shows that alignment and that cohesiveness within the system.
Great. Thanks, Christy. And some great answers in the chat as well. So there's many systems, as we saw in the last slide. We showed you 5 different systems. We also know that every school and every district is going to have somewhat different systems. Different systems are going to be a priority, even depending on your role or your school or your district and where the priorities lie. But these are 6 that we think at TNTP and through our work with CCSSO, that these are really 6 systems that if you give them good attention, you'll be well set up for learning acceleration. So we'll call out that they're not the only systems, but we're going to go through each of these 6 here in a little bit more detail later on in the session. Elizabeth is going to walk us through, and then we're going to give you all a chance to consider some of the resources geared around these 6 systems as well. But the first is engagement. And I actually think the last chat in the box from Shannon was around parent engagement and how do you rethink and reimagine engagement of any stakeholder, particularly parents, which is very vital. And then how do you make sure that it's effective to drive learning of students. Number two, curriculum and assessment. We've been talking about this for the last 3 to 4 weeks. We know that this is on the minds of a lot of you in terms of grade appropriate assignments, upending inequities within the classroom. Third is technology. And Elizabeth will touch on this here soon. Many of you had to certainly think about technology if you had to go virtual this year, but now as you come back to schools, technology is still going to be important. Maybe you're on a hybrid model. Maybe you just now have a wealth of technology that you didn't have before, and you want to think about how can you leverage that moving forward to change education. A lot of comments around staffing, and I mentioned some of the considerations there around recruitment, retention, the additional resource towards staffing, new positions that you have never had before within your districts. Scheduling, Elizabeth has done a lot of thinking about this in her direct work of learning acceleration in schools. So I know she'll have a lot to share and a lot of ideas. And certainly after the session, you can pick her brain on scheduling as you can mine around staffing. I do a lot of work with districts and schools around staffing. So happy to answer more questions there. And then progress monitoring, which we've touched upon through the academic lens, but certainly in terms of your systems, making sure that you are managing these. I give you 30 seconds to just digest these, but also put in the chat any systems that aren't up here, but are really important for you or on your mind, or just write them down quietly as a reflection, because I think the guidance that we're going to provide today, even if we don't directly address the system that's on your mind of one of these 6, the guidance will be helpful in providing you a framework of how to think about this. So drop in the chat if we've missed a system, or there's a system on your mind that is maybe not captured in one of these 6. Okay. Nothing in the chat so far, so hopefully we've captured a lot. Certainly the previous example mentioned resource allocation. It mentioned finance and budgeting, which can be very important as well. But Elizabeth, if you'll go to the next slide. So here's the framework that is going to carry us throughout the rest of the day. It's also a framework, some of the resources, and in terms of the note catcher or the note guide that Shireen can drop again into the chat. When you go there, you can make your own copy. This is the framework from which we believe you should really be thinking about those 6 system areas. And so you'll see those 6 systems within each box: engagement, curriculum and assessment, technology, scheduling, staffing, managing, and improving. And these are the 3 stages here. For most of you, you are either in the planning phase, or you will be in the planning phase, hopefully by summer at the latest. And so Elizabeth, if you go to the next slide, we're just going to hit on what we mean by each of these a little bit more. So planning is just what it sounds like: gathering the resources, the team, the questions, the decisions that have to be made in order to not just support learning acceleration in terms of the classroom and what we've covered the previous weeks, but also around these 6 systems here. How are you going to plan so that, like a few slides ago, all these systems are cohesive, they're interconnected, and they're all driving toward that ultimate goal of increased student learning within the classroom and better instruction. So the planning phase is the prep work that takes place. The spring and the summer is when that work should be taking place. So it's great that you all are on here. Planning is what should be on your mind here for the next several months as we move forward. Launching is the second stage, and it doesn't matter in terms of launching if you're defining launching as my school is going to go all the way back in person if you're not already and you're thinking about launching there, or just the start of a new school year. And in the context of today, we're really going to think about launching as how do you launch the 2021-2022 school year proactively instead of reactively and in as strong a systems position as you can. The launching phase, really think about this as the actual work that you've been planning to do in the planning phase in the 2 to 3 weeks that lead up to the new school year. So for most of you who come back to school in August or early September, we're really thinking about what is the work that needs to take place toward the end of July, in the month of August, to actually execute on what you've been planning the last several months. And so the launching phase is probably not a place where most of you are at right now, knowing that you're back in schools. But certainly, as you get to the end of summer, that launch phase is going to be the place where most of you are going to be living. And then finally, we'll talk about sustaining. This is the progress monitoring that we're talking about. We know that we can plan for systems and we can start to execute, but what we're talking about here, and I think someone mentioned it, there's so much to do in education, it can at times be daunting. It is a massive exercise in change management at all times, certainly in a year like this one and in the couple of years where we're going, make sure that students are on grade level and that we can support them. Some things hopefully with the proactiveness will go right and you'll hit it on the head and it will be the best system ever. But as you collect data, as you learn what's working and what's not, you're going to find things that you need to shift and you need to adjust. As we mentioned, that was one of our 7 core principles. And so the sustaining is around progress monitoring and making sure you have a plan to progress monitor, that you're using the correct data and that you're shifting. And the sustaining really, never ends, certainly throughout the school year or in the next couple of school years. And so if you think about this in these 3 different stages, the planning for spring, summer, launching the month or so before school starts, and then the sustaining, which is the school year progress and monitoring for your systems, we think that's a useful framework there. And so with that, Shireen, I think you were working on some polls, which we've used in the past, but there's some technical difficulties. So I think you're just dropping some questions in the chat. So I'll turn it over to you to just walk us through that and what we want folks to comment on here.
Sure. So if you'll see that the 6 areas, the 6 systems that we at TNTP have identified in terms of the most, the ones that need to be engaged in order to accelerate learning, engagement, curriculum and assessment, technology. The questions are as follows. And if you can number the one that correlates to the one that you are answering. So which of the 6 systems is your campus, district, region's strength? And then the second question is which of the 6 systems is your campus, district, region's biggest area of opportunity? And if you can just drop your answers in the chat, that will help us understand where you guys are and also help you maybe determine what groups you might want to work in later. Great, thank you, Lisa. So we're looking for which is the strength and which of the 6 is the area of opportunity. Yeah, we're seeing multiple, that curriculums in good shape. Engagement, and the earlier chat, I saw that, yes, everyone sort of defines that a little differently. I think you can think of it broadly in terms of this. Engagement is coming up as a theme, as an area of opportunity. And staffing. 'Tis the season.
Thanks, Shireen. And certainly engagement is really important. We've talked about parent engagement. Also say now is the time to engage your staff and your teachers and your leaders while they're still in your school buildings for the rest of the school year. Perfect time to hold focus groups to make sure that teacher voice and leader voices, as well as community voices, are present within your planning committees or your plans before final decisions are made. Engagement is a great one to plan for. All right, so we've talked a little bit about learning acceleration and where we've been. We've talked about the systems that surround that learning acceleration and what's important in terms of these 6 systems and the framework for thinking about the work over the next several months in terms of planning, launching, and sustaining. Next, Elizabeth is going to take us through a little bit more detail on each of these 6, although not too much, because we're going to give you some work time with some resources that define these in much more detail, so you don't have to listen to us speak about them for a couple hours straight. So Elizabeth, with that, I'm going to turn over to you to walk us through the important highlights for each of these 6.
Great. I'll direct your attention again to the handout that Shireen has been dropping in the chat. On page 3, it has sort of a note-taking template if you would like to take notes as we go through each of the 6 phase, engagement being the first topic we'll focus on. I'm just going to sort of narrate and give you some high-level perspective here. You may have specific questions that come up for you, for your context here, that you can jot down on that template or in whatever note-taking template is most useful for you as those ideas get churning and you're thinking. So our focus here is engagement, and we're going to go through the planning, launching, and sustaining phase and just talk about some high-level pieces here. In planning, this is when you're gathering information from your stakeholders, reflecting on the data that you receive, and then making a communication plan. So this is the gathering, reflection, and then making that plan. When you transition into launching, you will be starting with the rationale and communicating that rationale out. In our earlier sessions, we talked a lot about the rationale for renewal and the rationale for accelerated learning being key. And so in launching is when you are getting that rationale to your stakeholders. That is when you are presenting that. We've called it the inform step in earlier trainings. And that's in this launching timeline. This is where you want to get all stakeholders on board, from families to teachers to school leaders, curriculum teams, everyone in between, and make sure that that message is aligned and that everyone has the same rationale and the same communication. And then in sustaining, you want to follow through on the things that you said you would do. So if you gave a timeline for parents, you want to make sure that you're hitting those benchmarks, you're hitting those timelines for parents and families. This will need the most accountability checks on our ends in district offices, in school leadership teams, because while we're sustaining, we're holding ourselves accountable for everything we said we would do in the planning and launching phase of engagement. Sustaining is also when you'll check back in with your stakeholders. So you want to plan frequent check-ins, whether that's at key times when you're bringing parents and families into the school, like report card days or report card conferences, or another school-wide event where you get a lot of participation and buy-in, or whether it's talking with your curriculum team and curriculum teams at school-based levels and at the district level, having those check-ins so that you are sustaining that communication and sustaining the implementation piece. So that's engagement. And this is sort of the model we're going to go through here. If you have any questions or ideas, you can go ahead and throw them in the chat. And if we run into a topic where there's lots of chatter, we can stop and sort of have a quick debrief. We're going to go pretty quickly so that the majority of the time is given to you guys to dive in the work time. When we think about engagement, we want to dig in a little bit deeper to these systems to break down what should be included and how to think about each phase in this system. We won't dig in too deeply here, but it is worth reiterating that students and families and community members must be authentically engaged in any planning for a school success. And I think that's even more true now that we've been through this pandemic and we've realized how key that communication can be. This is a chance for us to be proactive around engagement, not reactive, and make that shift in our schools and in our districts. Authentically engaging families also means collaborating. So making sure that we are getting information from them and responding back to that information, not just informing them of a predetermined plan. And having that healthy feedback loop so you're getting feedback consistently. And this goes for all of your stakeholders as well. So your students, families, community partners, teachers, and of course, leaders in school buildings. Having that feedback loop, having that authentic engagement will help ensure that your plan is really effective in the planning, launching, and sustaining phase. And really our key point here is that when teachers and school leaders and district leaders engage students and families and the community as true partners, everyone reaps the benefits. So don't overlook this stage. It can really mean the difference between an effective renewal and a year and sort of an ineffective time. So we really want to focus here. In our first session, 8 sessions ago, we talked about how to do this work, how to start this work. And one place is to start with the information you have and then collect information you don't have using surveys or focus groups. So depending on where you are in this process, you may already have this information or you need to start collecting it now so that you can begin the planning phase. These were the key questions we started with in session 1. So wanted you to loop back to that knowledge and recall those steps for engagement. Okay, we're going to move on now to curriculum and assessment. Before I jump in here, I will say that this could have been 2 separate categories. There is a lot jammed into curriculum and assessment. We think they're linked, so we wanted to include them together for you guys. But you will also notice that there could be some curriculum decisions and assessment decisions you make separately. So you could think of them as 2 separate buckets. In the planning stage, we want you to start with the Learning Acceleration Guide from TNTP, the Nebraska Essential Content Guide, and your high quality curriculum materials. If you don't have high quality curriculum materials in a subject area or grade band, adopting one might be the first step to accelerating learning and to making sure you have the supports for your teachers and students in place. This may involve stakeholders on your curriculum teams, your teachers, and your school leaders. And we've also looped in the sort of data and assessment team with this curriculum focus. So when you're thinking about this, you want to be thinking about curricula-based assessments like our diagnostics that we said will be within our curriculum, end of unit, end of module assessments that exist within the curriculum, and then other assessments you give. Similar to We've talked about MAP and WEA in the past as something Nebraska uses. That's another assessment and data point you're going to want to loop in at this phase. Some of you talked about using DIBELS or iReady. Any of those universal screeners or benchmark assessments would be contained here. The launching phase for curriculum and assessment, like Chris said, is the 2 to 3 weeks before school starts or as school is starting for your staff. You're doing trainings. It involves not just curriculum trainings, but also training your coaches on the observation tools we looked at during the math and ELA sessions. That was session 5 and 6. And norming with leaders in school buildings and at the district level is key here. You want to make sure everyone understands what high quality instruction will look like and what accelerated learning looks like. Whether you use the videos that we used as examples of high quality instruction, or you use your own teaching and learning videos, your own teaching and learning team to demonstrate and model this, norming this across your system is going to be key for it to launch effectively. You'll also want to talk with your data and assessment team about your sort of data dashboard and how you can launch into the year, being able to look at diagnostic data as a key piece of your data dashboard. If you have a system already where you sort of gather high-level data at the school level, at the district level, or even across multiple districts, that's great. And including that diagnostic component so you understand the unfinished learning that exists and where that is across your district or across your school will allow you to allocate resource, time, energy into that area. So you want to include your data and assessment team when you're launching those plans. And then sustaining systems here. This is around all of the work you're going to do to make sure everything you train teachers and leaders on is happening. This could include observation walkthroughs you do with the ELA observation tool and the math observation tool that we've given you in sessions 5 and 6. It could also include any other sort of district-based or school-based accountability measures you put in place around curriculum implementation, around pacing guides. Depending on how tightly your district manages this, you could be checking in weekly or monthly to see that people are meeting expectations around where they should be in their pacing. I think for many, if you do adopt a curriculum like Zern, that'll allow you to sort of norm and see by logging into the administration side of Zern where everyone is in the Zern lessons, how they've implemented that curriculum. But otherwise, in terms of pacing guides, you want a system to sort of monitor implementation of that accelerated learning pacing guide. And none of this will happen overnight. So as you are trying to accelerate learning, you'll want to set a clear expectation of your end goal, but then celebrate the small wins along the way. So if you increase sort of mastery towards the pacing guide implementation or towards Zern implementation, 10 percentage points, 15 percentage points, you'll want to celebrate those glows along the way so that the team feels invested in continuing the hard work around accelerated learning. This is a huge bucket. So if you dive into this one in your group, you may separate it. But also I think they're so intertwined, curriculum and assessment, that we wanted to combine them here for you. Check the chat, see where we're at. Great, Chris put some resources around Zern there. That's exactly right. And we just want to give you a little bit of background around why we keep pushing for high quality instructional materials. Our goal is to make sure that everyone has equitable access to grade appropriate assignments. We've talked about that throughout in the opportunity myth research and in the data that we've gathered. getting students access to grade appropriate assignments is the first step in closing unfinished learning gaps and also in giving students an equitable education. So in order to do this, having a high quality instructional curriculum will help. Consider whether EdReports has rated the curriculum materials that you are using as high quality. That can be a great place to start. And make sure that every curriculum that you are using is a high quality curriculum, is aligned to standards, is culturally and linguistically responsive, can really help make sure that you're setting your teachers and your students up for success. If you see inequities start to pop up or start to exist, this is going to be in the launching stage where you'll explicitly train your teachers and school leaders on the importance of grade appropriate assignments for all students, even those who are behind. And if you see educators across your school or system providing lower quality assignments to some subgroups of students, you can use some of the tools that we've shared, some of the observation tools, or the Good to Great Reflection Guide to support your efforts at sort of sustaining this focus on accelerated learning and grade level work. And lastly here, in terms of curriculum and assessment, you want to make sure you have a data analysis process and schedule that's in place. So you can walk through these steps to make sure that everyone in the system is clear on the data analysis process. We want to make sure teachers have access to usable diagnostic data. Sometimes that will be upfront at the beginning of the year with a program like Dibbles that collects foundational reading skill data. And sometimes it'll be throughout the year when you're starting a new unit or module, you might have a diagnostic that pops up. You want to have a purpose for every assessment that you're giving. Make sure that your calendar details out when the assessment is and when you will review that data. Get feedback often here, working with your stakeholders to make sure that you're accepting that feedback and making sure to address any challenges that are anticipated in terms of assessments. And eliminate any excess assessment tools. So whenever possible, try to limit the number of assessments so that we have more teaching and learning time and less assessment days. So there is a risk here of like having too many assessments. So you want to find the balance to make sure you have actionable data and data that you need, but you're not overwhelming students, teachers, and leaders with sort of assessment overload. The next piece is around technology. And I know many of the schools in Nebraska are already back in school, which is great. Some are in a hybrid role, some are completely back. But during COVID, many school districts ended up with a lot more technology than they previously had. And also many teachers gained a wealth of knowledge around different technologies and different tools you can use. Whether that was, programs like Nearpod or Padlet, which we've been using at the beginning of our sessions for Do Nows. Many teachers have been using that, or Google Meets or Zoom or some of these other systems that we've been using. Teacher knowledge of technology has increased, and we can leverage that as a resource within our schools. We can also leverage any additional technology our schools have purchased or been given to make sure that we are closing all the gaps and using computer-based programs and other research-based programs for teams there. Scheduling. This has been my favorite step here, and the steps in scheduling can be district-wide or they could be school-specific. And you may have some district-wide decisions around scheduling, and you may have some school-based decisions around scheduling. So being clear at the district level, what are the priorities and non-negotiables is key. And then what is up to schools and what might different schools need support with around their daily schedule. So here, you want to review sort of this current schedule that you have and think of that schedule and the goals you have around learning acceleration, and look for places where they align and for gaps in your daily schedule. You want a schedule that allows for uninterrupted blocks of on grade level instruction where students are not being pulled for intervention. There needs to be a separate time, especially in the early grades. You want to make sure students are getting grade level instruction, but also any intervention, remediation they may need around foundational reading skills. So that could involve a change in a daily schedule. So that is really key here, is thinking about when is grade level instruction happening, and then when are some of these other pieces happening. A lot of folks spoke about MTSS, and that would fall into like, what is the schedule looking like for that? How are you maintaining and protecting grade level instruction time while also providing time for those other interventions or supports that we know many students with unfinished learning will need? Chris, were you going to jump in there? Oh, okay.
Nope, not going to jump up here. You probably have the most to add around scheduling, Elizabeth,
Okay, great.
in terms of the work you're doing.
Great. The other pieces around scheduling would be to determine what other supports you may have. This may get into a little bit of staffing, which will come up next, but you may need to repurpose staff, change people's roles, or provide additional staff capacity to provide that grade level instruction while supporting and scaffolding as needed. So more inclusion, more intervention supports throughout your school. And then another key lever that TNTP and CCSSO have found is tutoring plans for students. And you may have to get creative there around volunteers you can use, stipends, extracurricular. The beginning of an extracurricular block starts with tutoring, whatever the creative sort of system you can come up with. But having small group or individual tutoring may be a key lever to closing some of that unfinished learning for students. So think big when you're planning here, like put everything on the table and then work to create a schedule that meets the needs of your teachers, leaders, district, and also meets the needs of learning acceleration. During launching, you want to be very clear that you're monitoring students with special needs, special populations of students, and students with the most unfinished learning to ensure that they are getting access to that grade level work and additional supports, and not that supports are taking place of that work. You'll want to provide clear expectations, especially to ensure that students are getting all of those different components. And if you're able to kick off a tutoring program, that would happen in launching, and it would involve, again, stakeholders, could be community members who are volunteering, parents, and of course, engaging students in that process. And then setting clear expectations for supporting students with special needs so that you can balance sort of the needs that they may have with access to grade level content. Sustaining, again, will have to do with observing teachers and collecting data. So for curriculum and assessment, and as well as scheduling, you're going to find that observation and data collection are your key levers here in terms of accountability that will drive this work and continue to sustain it and make sure it's implemented effectively. And it's about having tough conversations in schools or districts where this might not be happening. So if you're noticing a gap in one of your districts or in one of your schools compared to other schools, it might involve a tough conversation about a need to change a schedule or add a program or go back to the launching and do another bit of rationale and roll out a component of the plan that didn't get rolled out effectively. So sustaining here will be sort of a cyclical loop that you'll be in. Okay. We're going pretty quickly, so I'll make sure people can sort of take any notes they need to. And I'll start with staffing, and then I'll let you jump in, Chris, because I think this is the one you had some notes on as well. Staffing will go hand in hand with scheduling, so you'll want to do these components together. But in planning, you'll want to think, big picture and throw everything on the table around what may need to change. You may need additional staff to focus on foundational reading skills, tutoring, inclusion supports for students. And so being able to adjust staffing models based on needs will be key. You might not need to hire new staff. It may be repurposing staff who can support in a different way. So that could be an interventionist who's now supporting in classes on grade level content to make sure students have those just-in-time supports. You'll want to identify any staffing gaps that you do have. That could be in the spring from folks that might not be returning, or it could be identified needs in order to provide those additional supports. In launching, if you are changing roles for folks, you'll want to make sure the rationale and the expectations are clear there. Staff that are changing roles will be more effective and more bought in if they have the rationale up front and the expectations of the new role, and then training as well to make sure that they understand accelerated learning and can provide those supports. Chris, anything to add here around staffing?
I think you hit the highlights. I would just say, my work all over the country, those of you who work in HR staffing on a regular basis know that this past year, part of staffing has been, it's hard to predict where the trends are going. At times, retention might be lower because of some of the conditions, in schools. And then at other times, retention, might be higher because people are thankful to have a job and to be working. And so that's just one example. We're really finding and encouraging folks to use the data that they have on an ongoing basis to really tell them what is going on, what the trends are. Those of you who are in HR know that now is the perfect time, if you haven't done so already, to provide letters of intent or hold stay conversations, retention conversations with staff in the spring and starting to hire. And then I think for this launching and sustaining, this connects back to any of the communication discussion that we've had throughout today and just how critical it is to make sure that you train staff, like we talked about on last Thursday's session, and that you're communicating with staff, particularly new staff or staff where they've been there in your district or your school a long time, but the systems are new. So those would be the high points I would make sure that you touch on.
Awesome. And our last category here is managing and improving. And so in the planning phase here, you're going to focus on setting goals. And setting a quality goal here is going to be key. So what are the outcome systems aimed to achieve for staff, students, and families? That's your driving question when you're setting a goal. And an example of a goal here, a system could set a quality goal around 100% of students will make progress towards mastery of grade level standards. So that could be sort of an example of a goal that you're setting. You could also have implementation goals. So a goal around what's the activity that needs to happen or the outcome that needs to be achieved. And an example of a system implementation goal here might be 100% of students complete rigorous assignments aligned to high quality curricular materials each day. So there's a few different types of goals you might be setting. You want to focus on equity in your goals, especially if you see places where you're lowering the bar or changing the goal. You'll want to ask yourself sort of where is that happening and why is that happening, so that you're considering equity while setting goals. And then prioritize and use data to understand progress towards those goals. And this will focus on that running an improvement cycle focused on access. So you're collecting the relevant data and you're monitoring access, analyzing gaps, and then addressing issues so that you can reach your goals. A few other components here to consider are like issues of privacy and equity in data collection that might exist. Your system may already have processes in place for ensuring that privacy and equity are considered, but there are other resources that we'll share with you around privacy and equity. And then when you use data to make sort of high stakes decisions, you want to make sure you're looking at multiple pieces of data, so that you're not putting all your emphasis on one piece of data. For example, map shouldn't be the only data or the only tool that you're using. You'll want to look at a range of data points so that you are best informed to make decisions and to monitor progress towards goals. So having multiple pieces of data can be really helpful in this process here. Okay, so that was sort of our speed version of sort of the planning, launching, and sustaining model around these 6 areas of focus. One more little bit here about managing and improving. Just again, a breakdown written a little bit differently, but setting goals, focusing on equity, prioritize and use data, and look at multiple pieces of data. So now what we are going to do is pause, and we'll stop talking, and we're going to give you first 10 minutes, and we are going to put in the chat the CCSSO guide. And that should be, when you open it, it'll open sort of as a PDF. And that is a 76-page document. Chris, do you want to sort of give the framing of that document before we jump in?
Sure. So CCSSO and, in collaboration with TNTP as well on part of it, did some thinking around the systems that we've walked through today and how do you ensure that these systems are strong? What should you be focused on? So this guide will go into much more detail on many of the things that Elizabeth talked about. It's quite long, so we would encourage you to do a couple of things with this resource. Number one, it was also geared toward when schools were virtual and before you relaunch, but it's really focused on how do you relaunch schools, or how do you relaunch a new school year and reimagine it, as many of you are thinking about. So think of it through the lens that is applicable to you and your school and your district. We would also encourage you in this 10 minutes, if there are a particular system that is intriguing to you because it's either a strength of your district and you want to know that if you're looking at the right things, if it's a growth area and you want to see, what should you be focused on, have a little bit more guidance there. It's great at breaking down the details around what to do in the short term and the long term. Around materials and assessments. It's talking about what to do if you have strong materials, what to do if you don't have strong materials. So you might just want to focus on one area. You might want to get a sense of what's in that resource. We'll come back from 10 minutes of reviewing. We're going to have the opportunity to either work individually or in small groups on any part of your plan, or to go into a small group with folks who are focused on the same system and have any discussions around what your school or your district or their school or district might be doing around this to collaborate. So would use these 10 minutes however it makes sense, to really leverage what you're thinking about here in today's session.
Thanks, Chris. I recommend going to the table of contents on page 3. It's hyperlinked, so then you can click there and get to other resources you may need. And so that can be a good tool for you there. And you can scroll through, find what you're looking for. So we'll set 10 minutes on the clock for independent time, and then we'll come back together and Shireen will put us in breakout rooms or individual work again. So I'll set the timer now so you can dive into this resource. for our next session. All right, Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Great. So we're gonna just let folks share a couple thoughts on anything from the resource guide here in a minute, and then we're going to go through our last few bits of material. So that those of you, we know some of you either don't have your full teams here, you can hop. Those of you who want to stay and work, want to collaborate, you have questions for us, you can stay on, and we'll do work time people want, as well as breakouts. But before we talk about the last couple of slides here, just love to hear quickly any takeaways from reviewing that document, things you found interesting, helpful. Obviously, it's very aligned with what we covered today. Anything that's on your mind after that review time. Anyone have anything they want to offer up to the group? All right, that's okay. I know it's getting late and you all have a lot on your minds. But we would encourage you. We know that the work for many of you is just starting. So many of you are in the planning phase, many of you just putting together your teams. And we know that what we went through today is a lot to digest. There's a lot of information there, in addition to all the systems we didn't talk about. Also know that that guide that you just reviewed, it has a lot more detail and a lot to digest and a lot of work to do over the many months from now. So we know the work's just starting, and hopefully that's helpful in the months ahead, in addition to all the other resources from these sessions. We're really going to start to think about what does it mean to manage all this change, and we're just going to give you a brief framework and a couple slides, but we're happy to talk more about it. And then we'll also work with NDE to provide more resources around change management for those of you who might find them helpful around the Launch Nebraska website. But what some folks have hit on either in comment or chat today is around this being proactive around so much to do, but really being proactive around accelerating student learning, ensuring that there is equitable access to grade appropriate instruction and materials in every classroom, and high expectations for all kids moving into next year. And I know, many of us, particularly when things were virtual, things are hybrid, there's this tendency to think about, can't just wait until things are quote unquote normal again. And you all have hit on things will never be normal again, and it is an opportunity where all students really need supports in order to accelerate learning, to reimagine education within our classrooms, reimagine the way that our different systems are connected and support learning within the classroom. And so we would encourage you to think of this certainly as a change management exercise, and want to make sure that as you plan, that you are aware of this framework of change management. It's well known. Certainly there are a couple others out there. We've talked with some districts where this idea of building a coalition to guide the work is top of mind, and so hopefully this is useful. Certainly there's a sense of urgency. I think you all feel that. That's why you're on this call. That's why you're already planning. That's why you're setting in motion your preparation to plan into next school year. We know that many of you are planning in the short term for summer school and how do we continue to address unfinished learning. We know many of you are already thinking to the start of next school year. Really, once you create this sense of urgency, start to build your coalition, and build your coalition through having a strong vision for what it is that your school or your district is trying to accomplish. Certainly this vision around accelerating learning to ensure that there are equitable opportunities and access to high expectations and grade appropriate assignments. putting that in writing, putting it in a clear, compelling way, and being able to articulate how all of your systems will shift to support that vision are going to be really, really important. Next, create your volunteer army, over communicate your vision, invest your staff, invest your stakeholders in your community, and then work to remove barriers and get short-term wins, get momentum for this work. Really, those short-term wins and removing barriers is going to happen somewhat in the planning stage. These quick wins are going to happen in the launching phase and in the first couple of weeks of school. Look at things that you can point to get short-term wins and let individuals, especially parents and families and students, know that you're on track. Sustain that acceleration, using the progress monitoring that we talked about, and then finally institute change and keep it moving over the next year or 2 years. So next slide, Elizabeth. This is just a quote. We know that successful change begins with results. And so talking about quick wins, talking about measuring your data in order to understand where you're at, shift priorities and resources if you need to, and to communicate those successes to your stakeholders is going to be really, really important. So that is all of the quote unquote new information that we want to provide to you all today. We're going to pause here and just allow you all to reflect, drop one thought and one next step into the chat for us, if you would. Just what are your final thoughts? What's on your mind after today's session? What's one next step that you want to commit to? Please put that in the chat. Lots of planning, Diana. See a couple comments on communication. Remember, you can think of communication as its own system. And so make sure you're not just overly communicating, but you're doing it intentionally and with a plan. Goals. That's great, Shannon. All right. Yeah, some of you might have a current plan. So you can hopefully use this and the resources to go back and take a look at it, revise and edit as you need to with data along the way. So with that, those of you who need to go or want to get started on this and take this information back to your teams, thank you for joining us today. If you have interest in staying on and working for a bit, or you have interest in going into a breakout room with anyone who's on here, Shireen can facilitate getting you into a breakout room. We'll hop on, we'll stay on here for as long as people want to work or be in breakouts, or if everyone needs to go, then we'll just hang out for a couple more minutes to see if folks have questions or anything else. But thank you. And Shireen, I think you're looking at the chat, so folks can chat with you if they want to be put in a breakout room. Is that correct? All right. Anyone who's still on want to be put in a breakout room, feel free to call that out or message Shireen in the chat, and she can facilitate that for you.
Jenny, how's the secondary math going? Are you there?
I'm thinking we could, I'm not sure if everybody is hearing this, but maybe we could make an OPS session with Deanna, Ginny, E West, Marnie, Lisa.
Let me do this. I got you.
Thanks.
Well, Deanna, you're a little bit pokey there with that text.
I just wasn't
Okay.
sure.
Here we come. I'm coming to the breakout room.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Go to the breakout. How could you, well, then Deanna said she left. You can still hear her across the cube, can't you?
Are we going to the OPS breakout room?
Yes,
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
you got it. If you need me to put you there, I can.
I might need you to. I don't know why it won't let me go.
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
know.
there, I think I got it.
You got it?
It's not letting me go.
Oh,
West.
you're not allowed. Here you go.